After Kublai Khan became Great Khan of the Mongol Empire in 1264, it was up to him to continue the legacy of his grandfather Chinggis Khan and complete the conquest of China. The Mongols believed that heaven decreed all the world to be their domain, and in this belief turned their attention to Japan. In this first episode of the second season, we will examine perhaps the most famous and seemingly inexplicable invasion undertaken by the Mongol Empire. A big thank you to the sponsor of this video, Magellan TV. Magellan is a new type of documentary streaming membership founded by filmmakers, their team of producers and curators that bring together premium content with a deeper dive. With a subscription to Magellan TV, you have access to featured genres of history, space, science, nature, as well as individual documentary movies and series. Magellan even has different specific history playlists like Ancient History. This playlist has documentaries that cover topics from Julius Caesar to the Egyptians to the Ottomans. Our new favourite from the Ancient History playlist is called Tomb of Genghis Khan and explores the mystery of Genghis Khan's hidden tomb. You can stream Magellan from anywhere on any device without any ads and no limited access. Many new programs are added on a weekly basis and a wide selection are available in 4K. We highly recommend you check out Magellan TV, and the first 100 visitors can go to magellantv.com/kingsandgenerals to get a 1-month free trial. Japan first came to Kublai's attention due to Japanese piracy on the coast of Korea from the 1220s until the 1260s. Political anarchy and Mongol invasions had left Korea unstable and unable to defend itself, but these operations ceased once Korea was finally conquered by the Mongols in 1259. Meanwhile, the Japanese continued to trade with Kublai's main enemy, the Song dynasty, supporting economically a foe Kublai was driven to crush. Until the 9th century, Japan and China were linked through trade, political and cultural ties, until persecution of Buddhism by the Tang dynasty led Japan to isolate itself. Thus, to bring Japan under his control would legitimize Kublai to his Mongolian supporters through conquest and to his Chinese subjects through bringing it back into the fold. Such symbolism mattered for securing and maintaining the mandate of heaven, which granted dynasties the right to rule China. In 1266, Kublai sent his first envoys to Japan, inviting them to offer tribute. While this letter didn't feature overt threats of destruction, it still referred to Kublai as Master of the Universe, and the implication was hardly hidden in the letter's conclusion: "Let us engage in cordial relations. Who desires the resort to arms?" While Kublai's letter was addressed to the emperor, since the late 12th century the emperor had been a figurehead for the shogun, and after the death of the first shogun, real power was held by his regent, the shiken, a position controlled by the Hojo clan. Kublai's envoys in 1266 were ignored, a brusque reception the Khan did not take lightly, with similar responses to envoys in the following years. The silence increasingly looked like insolence, an affront the most powerful sovereign on earth could not ignore. Kublai's preparations for this unprecedented sea-borne Mongol invasion began in 1268. As the Mongols had little experience in naval warfare, aside from operations on the rivers of China, they relied on the expertise of Korean sailors and their vessels. In addition, the Koreans also supplied the provisions for the invasion, a burden which led to a short-lived revolt. This uprising gave word to the Japanese of Mongol preparations, and the new shiken, Hojo Tokumune, began his own preparations. Warriors were sent to Kyushu, the most likely site for landings. The fall of the key Song stronghold at Shenyang in 1273 freed men and resources to be sent elsewhere. Japan too could finally receive its retribution for resisting Kublai's demands. Exact numbers for the Mongol forces are disputed, with estimates giving 15,000 Mongol, Northern Chinese, Khitan and Jurchen soldiers, 6,000 to 8,000 Korean soldiers, and another 7,000 Korean sailors spread among some 300 warships and 400 to 500 smaller vessels, a large contingent but not enough to occupy a country. While Kublai's forces had never undertaken an overseas operation before, the last 60 years had provided few foes who could match the Mongols in battle. If the mighty empires of the Jin and the Song bent to the Mongols, how could the small nation of Japan dare stand before him? To Kublai, anything other than a swift victory was impossible. The fleet departed from Korea in autumn 1274, falling first upon the small islands of Tsushima and Iki. These sparsely defended settlements offered little resistance to experienced Mongol warriors, for in their isolation from the mainland, the samurai had developed their own brand of warfare, reliant on individual duel rather than the complex formations of the Mongols. The Mongols left Tsushima and Iki with prisoners nailed to the prows of their ships, arriving in Kyushu's Hakata Bay in November. Their landing was not unopposed. An old sea wall ran along much of the bay, and behind it were stationed the warriors of Hojo Tokimune. Numbers for the Japanese force are disputed, with some figures as low as 3,600, and it is clear that the defenders were outnumbered, with no experience in fighting foreign forces, and lacking the tactical and strategic ability of the Mongols. With the landing of the Yuan Armada, the first battle in Hakata Bay had begun. The samurai were, like the Mongols, skilled archers both on foot and on horseback, wielding their signature asymmetrical yumi. The Japanese opened combat with whistling arrows, designed to unnerve and intimidate their foes. Japanese sources describe the Mongols as laughing at the arrows, then driving the horses of the samurai mad with fear at the sounds of the war drums and gongs used to direct Mongol forces in battle. Unused to such noise, the Japanese horses panicked before they even met the enemy. Defending their homes and skilled warriors nonetheless, the Japanese fiercely fought along the sea wall. The Mongols, fighting uphill from the beaches, were unable to bring their fearsome cavalry to bear, but as shown from archaeological and pictorial evidence, the Mongols used bombs against the Japanese. In a few places the Mongols broke through, burning down the nearby town of Hakata. The area beyond the breach proved unfavourable to the Mongols, however. The site chosen for their camp, Akiseka, proved undefendable, and Japanese archery proved skillful even by Mongol standards. The Yuan commander, Liu Fushang, was struck in the face with an arrow and had his horse captured by a samurai. With their commander incapacitated, unable to press inland, and running low on munitions, despite inflicting heavy losses on the Japanese, a withdrawal was ordered. What followed next is a matter of some debate, but has become a defining moment of the campaign. Japanese sources for this invasion describe a reverse wind which pushed the Mongol fleet back, beaching a few ships. Yuan sources, on the other hand, speak of a great typhoon which rose up, crushing much of the fleet beneath the waves and forcing the remainder to retreat. The reasons for such an emphasis are obvious, for by blaming a freak weather accident, the Mongols could maintain their military reputation rather than admit that the Japanese had offered stiffer resistance than anticipated. Neither side saw this first engagement as decisive, and when Kublai's envoys in 1275 were executed, his return was ensured. In 1279, the Song dynasty finally fell to the Mongols, completing the conquest of China begun by Chinggis Khan in 1211. Now Kublai could raise men, resources and ships from southern China to use against Japan. With Korea economically devastated by the first invasion, these newly conquered troops had to take a leading role. In Japan, Hojo Tokimune did not sit idle, repairing and extending the seawall around Hakata Bay for 20 kilometers, as well as preparing a larger defense. By 1281, Kublai was ready to strike back, gathering perhaps the largest seaborne invasion before the Normandy landings of 1944. While it is to be expected that medieval sources inflate numbers, it is clear by any measure that this was a mammoth undertaking. The sources state that over 100,000 men were split between two fleets, a northern fleet of approximately 40,000 Mongols, Jurchen, northern Chinese and Korean troops aboard 900 ships, and another of around 60,000 men from the newly conquered territories of southern China aboard 3,500 vessels. Few of these were proper ocean-going warships or transports, rather repurposed coastal or river ships never intended for such lengthy expeditions. Immediately, the expedition was off to an inauspicious start. Intended to leave in spring to avoid the typhoon seasons, the southern fleet suffered delays, a general fell ill, and food spoiled in the warm weather of South China. The plan had been for the northern fleet, departing again from Korea, to rendezvous on Iki with the southern fleet departing from Quanzhou, but ultimately the northern fleet set off alone, occupying Iki by June 1281. 2 weeks later, the fleet was off the coast of Kyushu, but found the landing sites defended by well-prepared samurai on the seawall. The stout resistance near Manakata kept the northern fleet from fully landing or making progress inland. The southern fleet finally arrived in July towards the southern end of the wall and intended to fight their way north to meet with the first fleet. But this southern fleet, composed almost entirely of Chinese from the recently conquered Song dynasty, lacked the skill, discipline and experience of the Mongol troops and had little stake or interest in risking their lives for foreign masters in a foreign land. The language barrier between the Mongols, Koreans, Chinese and others, and tensions between Mongol and Chinese generals and the Korean admiral, weakened leadership and their ability to act. From late June to early August, the Yuan and Japanese engaged largely indecisively, the Yuan unable to advance against the Japanese, but the Japanese unable to overpower the Great Armada. At night, the Japanese took their smaller, nimble craft out among the fleets, climbing aboard and killing men in their sleep, or sending fire ships out to set ships alight. Yuan losses were mounting, with supplies running low, unable to billet their men on anything but what they brought with them. Nights aboard cramped, rocking ships proved no respite for Mongol warriors used to open steppe, knowing samurai may come crawling out of the darkness. On the 15th of August 1281 came the coup de grace. The sea off the coast of Kyushu churned as a typhoon rose unseasonably early, the Yuan fleet now caught between the storm and the coast. The sturdier Korean vessels made for open waters managed to avoid being crushed against the rocks, but the more makeshift southern fleet was helpless against the ocean's wrath. Over August 15th and 16th, perhaps a third of the northern fleet and over half of the southern were destroyed, and the second Mongol attempt to take Japan was over. Those Yuan soldiers who washed ashore were swiftly found by the Japanese and killed, while the remainder limped back to China. Kublai was furious. The aura of Mongol invincibility, built up over the century, was not destroyed but was definitely tarnished, and the economic blow was significant. The second invasion was a massive expenditure of men and resources, much of which now sat at the bottom of the ocean. Korea in particular was devastated, having provided much of the grain, ships, materials and young men of both invasions. To cover the costs, Kublai had to turn to financial advisors such as Ahmed Fanikati and Li Shizheng, who became infamous for corruption, nepotism and overtaxation, ushering an era of financial mismanagement and increasing inefficiency. In 1281, a major restraining voice on Kublai, his chief wife Chabi, died, followed by his heir Jingim in 1286. With their deaths, Kublai became increasingly withdrawn from governance, finding solace in food and drink, and suffering from depression, obesity and gout. His military demands grew ever wilder. He ordered a third invasion of Japan, which never materialized, launched invasions of Burma, Vietnam, and even a seaborne invasion to Java, all of which ended inconclusively or in outright disaster, the tropical heat and disease of southern Asia and dense jungle rendering Mongolian cavalry useless. He faced revolt from Tibet and from his cousins Kaidu and Nayan, who challenged Kublai's legitimacy from Central Asia and Manchuria. All the while, his influence over the western khanates of the empire grew ever weaker. Despite having completed the conquest of China, Kublai oversaw the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire. Kublai Khan died in February of 1294, succeeded by his grandson Temür-ul-Jeytu. The succeeding Yuan Khans held only nominal authority over the other khanates, each going their own separate paths and collapsing over the following century.